After everything I've been through, I certainly deserved a happy ending. Sadly, I don't believe those exist anymore. I thought getting kidnapped was the worst experience of my life. Turns out, he wasn't done with me when the ransom was handed in. Before I get into any of that though, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you don't, a monster will visit you in your sleep. That's actually how all of this started, with a stupid urban legend. One day, my best friends and I were reading stories online about local ghost stories. We came across this one about visiting this bridge late at night. Legend has it, if you go there at midnight, you'll see the ghost of a boy. We were about 13 at the time, and that stuff sounded so cool to us. Without our parents' permission, we decided to go out and try it. The three of us stayed up all night, and to our surprise, someone did jump out and grab me. At first, I really thought it was the ghost of the murdered boy, but this was no ghost. Some boy, who couldn't be much older than us, dragged me away. My friends were screaming. He threw an envelope at them and told them to give that to my father. The money better be in the designated location by 5 a.m. If not, well, you won't be very happy. Do not call the police or else. I was so scared. My father was very famous and wealthy, but I never thought I'd get caught in the middle of such a scandal. My dad paid the ransom and then he just disappeared. We never got a good look at his face because he had a surgical mask on. He put me in a car and blindfolded me. Next, we drove for the next few hours. The kidnapper kept apologizing. It was so weird. Was this guy stable? So many questions flew through my mind. How scary would it be if my dad didn't answer my friend's knock at the door? What would he do if the cops were called? Lucky for me, those were questions I never had to answer. At one point, my kidnapper stopped the car and told me to brace myself. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but before I had time to think, he pushed me. Next, I fell onto grass. It wasn't soft, but I didn't really get hurt. I heard the car driving off, and I took off my blindfold to see I was in the middle of a parking lot. A few minutes later, my father drove up in his car. The kidnapper had texted him the details of where to find me once he escaped. He called the police to try and catch the kidnapper, but he was nowhere to be seen. Everything was dark when he kidnapped me, and he was wearing a surgical mask, so I never got a good look at his face. Plus, I was blindfolded most of the time. The only thing I could remember was his deep voice. I was so scared. I didn't leave the house for weeks. I went to therapy for a long time and even had to redo the whole school year. I could not stand the dark anymore. I never left the house at night at all. I constantly thought I saw him around all the time. At first, I thought I had my trauma under control, but it became apparent it was consuming me. One time, my friends tried to convince me to come out dancing with them. While we were on the dance floor, this guy started to dance next to me. He wasn't doing anything weird at all. He was actually super polite. I felt bad, but I was just so uncomfortable. He tried to whisper something in my ear, and he got so close to me. I don't know what came over me, but I just saw my kidnapper in the surgical mask. I punched him right in the face, and everyone stared at me. The guy was my friend's cousin, so she was super angry at me for giving him a black eye. After that, she stopped inviting me out anywhere. She ignored all my calls and apologies. Finally, I got a call from another friend who felt bad leaving me out in the cold. I was so relieved when I saw the call from her, but it only made me feel even worse. She told me that I was out of the friend group until I could act normal. I asked what that was supposed to mean. She told me I was being crazy. They had all been gossiping about me and said I spent too many years grieving kidnapping. It was just a few hours in a stranger's car, Mandy, she said. It's not like you died or anything. Having someone call out your insecurities like that? She was right in a way. I felt so guilty for acting the way that I did. I found it very difficult to be around guys since the incident. See, I went to an all-girls private school and had virtually no contact with any guys at all, except my father. In fact, I barely saw anyone at all except for my friends. Without them, I was afraid I'd fall into an even darker space. I begged them to hang out with me again, but she said they weren't so sure. We were adults, and at 19, and almost all of my friends had boyfriends. If I couldn't hang out with guys without having a freak out, they wanted nothing to do with me. You can come back in our group on one condition, she told me. Prove to us that you can be around a guy. Her solution was that I needed to find a boyfriend. This would be better for everyone as I would stop fifth-wheeling and ensure I could stay behaved. I agreed because I was desperate. But how was I even supposed to do that? Even if I didn't actively avoid boys, there were none at school or anything. My closest chance of meeting a guy would be approaching someone in the supermarket. Now, my standards are pretty low, being my selection is limited to a grocery store, but one day, when I was out shopping, I saw this super hot guy. Like, I am talking model-worthy. He was tall and built. He looked like a boy band member. I kind of stalked him for a while, following him aisle to aisle and peeking at him from behind shelves. Part of me wanted to run up to him and steal a kiss. The other was a little petrified. I awkwardly watched him from afar, weighing my options out. I looked around the store and saw the other eligible bachelors. I decided there was no way I was letting such a hottie go. I was going to ask him out myself. I approached him and let him know that I was quite interested in getting to know him a little better. He looked at me and quickly looked away, very flustered. He ran out of the store. I thought it was kind of attractive. Maybe he was just as nervous as I was to talk to a girl. I chased after him and yelled at him to wait. I followed him up to the car, explaining that I didn't mean to scare him off. I'm sorry, I need to go. You! I exclaimed in a panic. That voice! The way he apologized, I was immediately flashed back to the kidnapping that had ruined my social life. It was him! I can never forget that voice. He left everything in his car and pushed it away from him and moved towards me. I now know where my internal fears were coming from. As the attractive boy came at me, I met his eyes. Without the surgical mask, it was difficult to recognize him. But now that I heard his voice apologize, I knew this was him. I quickly turned to run away, but he grabbed my arm. Before I got the chance to scream or anything, he pushed me into his car. Next, he leaned in and told me I had to be quiet or else, and hand over my phone. I did what he said. He popped my phone in his pocket and got in the driver's seat. Next, we were driving somewhere. I was so scared of what he could do to me, so I just sat very still in the passenger seat and looked forward. We didn't say a word until he stopped at this shack in the middle of nowhere. My mind was racing. I was again just a 13-year-old waiting for her dad to pay the ransom. I was shaking. It was like my deepest nightmare. When we went inside, it didn't look like the torture chamber I was imagining. There were no knives hanging from the ceiling or a woman tied in a corner. Instead, it looked like he lived here. He instructed me to sit on the sofa, and I followed his orders. I heard a loud pop and quickly closed my eyes and covered my head. "Don't hurt me!" I yelled. "What?" he asked, looking confused. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you. I just can't have you going to the cops." I asked what he planned on doing to me then. Holding me hostage? Killing me? He looked even more shocked and put his hands up. He told me to calm down and he would just explain everything. He told me this was his home and he had something to show me before I called the cops on him. He showed me another room where this woman was lying in bed, hooked up to a bunch of beeping machines. He explained that the money he got for our ransom was all for his mother's very expensive cancer treatment. He never intended to hurt me, but he found no other way of getting the money. His shifts were long and hard, but he barely made enough to cover his rent. In fact, he already spent all the ransom money on her first treatment, and he needed more money for additional surgeries. Jeff talked about his mom, and I don't know why, but he just got even more attractive to me. He was so kind and funny, and he had a real reason to have kidnapped me all those years ago. He too was haunted by the mistakes that he had made in desperation. He had actually been wanting to talk to me and formally apologize for anything that happened. But he always chickened out. I was completely lost in thought when we heard violent banging at the door. "Open up, it's the police!" He immediately turned at me and panicked. "If they take me away, if I'm not here to take care of my mom?" he started to say. Just then, the door busted in and there were 4 police officers and my father. "Daddy, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me!" He told me that one of his friends was at the store and saw my suspicious exchange with Jeff. They immediately called him thinking I was in trouble. And when I didn't answer his many calls, he used the tracking device in my phone to find me. I immediately jumped to Jeff's defense and said that I was perfectly fine. We were just talking. My dad was very skeptical. He said he'd never seen the boy in his life and doubted he was one of my friends judging by his house. He asked me why I got into his car all alone. "Because he's my boyfriend," I yelled out before I could think of anything else. I made up a fake story on how we had just finished an internship and we met once at the store. I said I had to keep it a secret because Dad was smothering me. "I'm 19. You can't tell me what to do anymore." This was partly an act, but there was some truth to it. It took reconnecting with my kidnapper to get me to confront my father. My father got very embarrassed. and the police looked very annoyed. "Oh, well, we'll talk about this later, Mandy," my father awkwardly said as he slipped through the door. When we were finally alone, I frantically apologized to Jeff. I had no idea what had gotten into me. It was just the first thing that came to my mind. "Us being in a relationship was the first thing that came to your mind?" He laughed. "Well, I owe you one. Seriously, anything." I told him he could start by driving me home and giving me my cell phone. I now saw I had a lot of missed messages, most of which were from my father. I read through them on the drive back to my house. I started getting a sinking feeling in my stomach, partly because I didn't feel safe driving with Jeff, also because it seemed my little white lie spread pretty fast. My father had been very worried, so called all of my friends asking where I was. When it all ended, he called them all back to ask about my boyfriend. I got countless messages from my old friends asking me to meet that weekend to talk all about Jeff. Most important of all, I got a very nice message from my father, saying how proud he was of me working past my problems and apologizing for intruding tonight. He said he was worried I was never going to have a normal life because of what happened. As I got out of the car and we were ready to bid our farewells, an idea popped in my head. "See you, Mandy." "Thanks again, really." Jeff laughed. "Wow, 3 hours is the shortest relationship in my life." "Actually, Jeff, there is something you can help me with." I asked him what he thought about prolonging our arrangement a little bit longer. I think I had a solution to both of our problems. I explained to him the problem with my friends and me, needing a boyfriend to hang out with them. I told him that if he acted like my boyfriend, I would pay him some money to keep up the cancer treatment and I wouldn't go to the police. Plus, this was probably good for my mental health, right? He was very happy about this and we exchanged numbers. I introduced Jeff to my friend group that weekend, and they loved him. We told our fake story again, and we laughed about all these inside jokes. It was actually really nice. Like, I knew the entire thing was fake, but part of me was all wrapped up in it still. We continued meeting like this a few times with my friends and father. The weird thing is, the nightmares even stopped for a bit. I had somehow convinced myself it was all real. One day, after he dropped me off, I realized I was comfortable being around him. This was a breakthrough for me. I went from punching random guys on the dance floor to calmly sitting in the car with my ex-kidnapper. He turned to say goodbye, and without thinking, I just blurted those 3 words out. "I